Similarities between Moses and Jesus. Deuteronomy 18:18-19, God says to Moses, "I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their fellow Israelites, and I will put my words in his mouth. He will tell them everything I command him. I myself will call to account anyone who does not listen to my words that the prophet speaks in my name." Yeshua, Jesus Christ, fulfilled the Old Testament prophecies and was the promised Messiah. There are many similarities between Moses and Jesus, but we will mention here a few of them. Both Moses and Jesus were considered prophets by their respective religious communities. Both are central figures in their religions, Moses in Judaism and Jesus in Christianity. Moses and Jesus both received revelations from a higher power, with Moses receiving the Ten Commandments from God on Mount Sinai and Jesus receiving his teachings from God the Father. Both were leaders who performed miracles and were believed to have had a special connection with the divine. Both figures are considered lawgivers, with Moses receiving the laws of Judaism and Jesus' teachings serving as the basis for Christian morality. Moses and Jesus both played a key role in delivering their people from oppression, with Moses leading the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt and Jesus offering salvation and liberation from sin. Both Moses and Jesus faced opposition and persecution during their lifetimes, and both suffered rejection by those they were trying to help. Both figures are recognized as models of selflessness, devotion, and sacrifice. Both Moses and Jesus are seen as intermediaries between God and humanity, representing God's will and serving as messengers of divine truth. Both figures are revered as sacred figures in their respective religious traditions and are honored with celebrations and commemorations. Moses and Jesus both feature prominently in Scripture, with Moses being featured in the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the Pentateuch, and Jesus being the central figure in the New Testament. Both Moses and Jesus have been subjects of much debate, discussion, and interpretation over the centuries, and their stories continue to inspire and challenge people today. Both Moses and Jesus were seen as exceptional individuals, chosen by God for a special purpose, and as such, their lives and teachings hold great significance for their followers. Both Moses and Jesus emphasized the importance of love and compassion for others, and taught that the highest form of devotion to God is to love one's neighbor as oneself. Both figures are seen as mediators of God's presence, and their presence is considered to bring blessings, healings, and spiritual transformations to those around them. Both Moses and Jesus were seen as having a special relationship with God, being in close communication with the divine, and being able to communicate God's will to others. Both figures are also seen as embodying the qualities of a true spiritual leader, such as wisdom, courage, and humility, and as such, they continue to be viewed as models of leadership and spiritual development. Both Moses and Jesus are revered as symbols of hope, redemption, and renewal, and their lives and teachings continue to inspire millions of people all over the world. Both Moses and Jesus were born when Israel was under bondage, Moses in Egypt and Jesus in Israel, Roman Empire. Orders were issued by the kings for their death at birth. Both were miraculously delivered from death during their infancy. Both had been born and found in unusual places. Both Moses and Jesus were protected and preserved by the faith of their parents. Both Moses and Jesus stayed safe in Egypt during their respective times. Both Moses and Jesus had their brethren and family speak against them. Both predicted Israel's history. Both spoke out against Israel's enemies and persecutors. Both had the forces of nature obey them. Each had 70 helpers during their time. Both had face-to-face relationship with God unlike any other person. Both fasted for 40 days and 40 nights in the wilderness to bring covenant. Both Moses and Jesus reflected and shone the glory of God. Both contended with master of deception and darkness. Both prayed for the people's intercessory prayers and were willing to bear the consequences of the people's sins. Both Moses and Jesus established the priesthood. Moses began the Aaronic priesthood, which was temporary under the law, while Jesus established an eternal priesthood under the new covenant of grace which he alone functions as the high priest forever.